Hey everyone, my name's Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships 360, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Jeff Mavros, who's the Executive Director of Admissions and Enrollment Marketing at Illinois State University. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Will. It's great to be here.
So I'd like to start these conversations off with a little bit of myth busting. I know in admissions, financially, there's so many misconceptions that students have, and parents as well. And I'm curious, Jeff, from your perspective, what are the biggest misconceptions that students might have about higher education?
Sure. This is a great question because, as you said, I think there are many. I think maybe one of the biggest misconceptions that students have is that higher education is just simply unaffordable. I think a lot of students rule out college before knowing enough, exploring their options, and doing things like completing the FAFSA or speaking with a financial aid professional, or even having a better understanding of what grants or scholarships or even loans might be available to them. I think a lot of students are too early to kind of limit their choices. And so, I think there are lots of ways that students ultimately realize they can make college a reality. And I think sometimes the other part to this is students kind of feel that higher education is a financial burden more than it is really an investment in their future. And so um, we know that higher education is not inexpensive, and yet it's so much more than a transaction. And I think there's a lot of research to show that a degree earns or lends itself to higher lifetime earnings, um, career flexibility, certainly the personal growth that comes along with the experience. So I think when students start to begin to view college as an investment and an investment in themselves, as opposed to just seeing the expense piece of it, there's so many opportunities that kind of avail themselves to the students. So I think those are some of the things that are big on my list.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I agree. I think students sometimes can be very focused on the input of cost and the output of debt, versus the certainly an input of time and resources and money, but all of the learning and growth and development, and then I think the output of increased earnings. It's a very like rapidly changing economy, and students who have a college education are going to be really well set up to adapt to whatever the future holds. So I think that's a really great misconception that folks have. Kind of related, Jeff. I'm curious, from your perspective, what do you think affordability really means in higher education today? I think sometimes students are looking at the number that the government or a school might say is affordable. People are looking at their own personal financial situation. And you might have a different idea of what's affordable. I know a lot of the like hidden expenses of college are a hot topic. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah. I guess first of all, I'd say affordability is a charged word. I mean, we've kind of gotten away from even talking about how affordable, quote unquote, we are. We really try to talk to students about managing the costs of higher education, kind of to our the point that you and I kind of were both just making. I think it affordability. Um, Seems a little bit more transactional even in the language than talking about managing a cost of an investment in your future. And so the thing about affordability is, as you pointed out, it's just so personal and individual, and it's pretty complex. I mean, it varies from one family to another, depending on, things like income and savings and, even their financial priorities or their expectations of the different members of that family as to who's taking on what piece of kind of the management of the costs of higher ed. Of course, everybody wants, grants and scholarships to fully cover all the costs, and
Hmm.
it's all, free money, quote unquote. But you and I both know that those kinds of comprehensive aid packages are pretty rare. And so, for some families, affordable education means being able to pay all their expenses without taking out loans. For others, affordability might just mean, it includes borrowing, but with limits that they consider manageable. And so, uh, the word affordable just depends so much on not just the total price of attendance, but each family's comfort level with debt and their access to financial resources, and probably more than anything, their perceptions of the value of, a college degree in the long term. So, I think the very first point that I would make is just that affordability is a word that we try not to use because it does mean so many different things to different people. But obviously, managing cost and that component of this process is so important for so many students and families, and of course, we understand that.
Moving away from the word affordability has come up several times recently. And was one admissions professional told me, like, a few years ago, if you were covering, they had a scholarship, it was like a full tuition scholarship. That was considered great. And I think the conversation has sort of shifted, where students now might be more like, okay, but then what about these other costs for like housing and books and all the other expenses, and it's not necessarily like considered as like affordable, just as the landscape has shifted a bit. um, and I think for a really good reminder for students and families just to you know think about this conversation about cost earlier on. And I think it's just so important to have really frank conversation about all of the things that you outlined, Jeff, just because it's there are a lot of there are a lot of college options, and I feel pretty confident that students can find a pretty most students can find a pretty low cost option somewhere. It might not be the one specific school, but there's thousands of schools in the U.S. That are wonderful, and will offer a really great experience and a good value.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that.
Um, One subset of students that I think has come up in conversations and is getting a little bit more visibility over the past few years has been students kind of in the quote unquote middle class students who, you know, might be qualifying for some financial aid, but not a lot. Where they parents and guardians might have to contribute, you know something that seems pretty significant. Just kind of where their income and earnings are. I'm curious from your vantage point how this you know conversation about middle class students, particularly students who are considering public institutions, has evolved during your time at Illinois State.
Yeah, it's that's a really interesting point because I think uh, we've kind of experienced a little bit of a shrinking of the middle class, depending on how you define that.
Mhm,
And so, you worry a little bit less about the families with all the means in the world who have choice in the process and can manage those costs really without borrowing much and without requiring much in the way of state or federal aid or even institutional aid. And likewise, the highest of need students, they're often kind of bolstered by statewide programs, federal programs, and potentially have other sources of funding available to them because of their level of need. And so it's that middle group that often gets squeezed. And, more and more, almost regardless of household income, families are needing help to pay for college. And so I think it's kind of incumbent upon schools to be responsive to that. I think schools are well aware, especially given today's environment where there are just fewer college going students, and we're in a little bit of this trough in terms of birth rate and just it's just straight census data that there are fewer students out there of a
mhm,
traditional college going age, right? And so we've all got to do what we can do to try to make higher education accessible to qualified students. And so for my own institution, we've added millions of dollars in institutional aid over the last 5, 10 years to help families kind of fill the need gap. And that's not really just for the subset that you mentioned. We're trying to kind of ease the burden across the board, but there are certain populations, like I said, that we worry about a little bit less than that middle class group, and that middle class group is really important to the economic engine of America, and what we need to be doing, what higher education is really all about. So it is a focus of ours, and I imagine it is for a lot of institutions, where we're just putting more and more institutional aid out there for those students that might be kind of squeezed, and I think we have to continue to look at ways to do that. So.
Yeah, no, well, appreciate that, and I know, like, it's like one of the quintessential parts of like the kind of quote unquote American dream, just being able to attend a 4-year institution. And yeah, I definitely agree with you that it is sort of a tricky problem to solve, but it's great just to see schools like Illinois State putting some additional attention and resources into supporting some of these students. Kind of related, I think, I mentioned the term hitting costs earlier, which a lot of folks use to describe like housing, books, transportation, and some of the other college related expenses that maybe not be um, you know accounted for in a financial aid package. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you have any advice for students and families who might be just thinking ahead about some of these expenses?
Yeah, and I think it's wise. I mean, you referenced earlier kind of full tuition scholarships, and while that sounds great, and that is, that can be great for students, it doesn't mean that you're going uh, fully free, right? And that there are
Mhm.
no out of pocket expenses, and so it's all these other things that I think families need to be aware of. So, as you know, schools are required to establish a cost of attendance for students. And so I think that helps them really identify kind of all of the costs that are associated. We try to be very upfront and transparent in our financial aid packaging, utilizing averages of what our own students tell us they do in terms of discretionary spending and some of the costs that they incur. And of course, some students spend more than others. So sometimes emergencies occur in a student's life. And so for every student, those indirect costs are going to vary a little bit. But at the same time, students' actual costs can even be lower than some of what the estimates that we'll put in front of them are, because we're again using an average of what our students tell us. And there's of course a lower end of that average. And so there's students that really do this on the cheap. And so, it's as an example, textbooks, right? You referenced that students can find digital versions. They can rent when possible. They can use, campus library resources or find online resources for free. There are a lot of ways to be creative
Mhm.
with textbook purchases. I think around like monthly expenses, I think just it's a great life skill and something to start early for students to think about creating a budget and just tracking their spending and having some idea as to how much they do spend in a month on certain things. Um, and then things even like in their college town and their local community, thinking about what are those student discounts that are available to them in the way of either transportation or entertainment or dining or shopping or any of those extras, and they can plan ahead to kind of limit that discretionary spending. So, at Illinois State, we have a course that we call Cash Course, and it's just free to students. It's a financial guide to help them kind of make informed financial decisions. And so that resource is just sitting out on our website. We have students that work during the summer, work part time through the year. There's so many ways for students to
Mhm.
kind of budget for all of these things. And I think it's just a matter of asking the questions going into it, Will, so that they have a very wide open view as to what they can expect in the way of costs. And then they can plan. And again, every student's going to be different, but having a plan is the important part.
Yeah, no, I think there's so much great advice there, Jeff. Just ranging from, thinking about this in terms of, a budget and just understanding what your sort of lifestyle looks like. Trying to, see if there's things you can optimize for, like books, for example. Like I remember, buying and then selling used books off, eBay and Amazon, which is a great way to save money. Um, I think transportation can be a tricky one. That is going to vary, very much. If it's a student in the Chicago area attending Illinois State versus a student in Houston, Texas, or in South Florida. Those are just going to be very different expenses because you might have to, they might entail a flight or just a really long drive and gas and everything. So definitely as students and families are thinking about this, it's great to great to identify those costs, but then also some of the opportunities that there might be. Um, a few other that come to mind being, sometimes at certain schools, being a residential advisor, you can waive your housing costs, and at some schools you might even get a stipend to do that, which can save you thousands and thousands of dollars. And then students who, or if you're taking any like AP and IB classes, or dual enrollment classes in high school, depending on the college, you might be able to, transfer those courses in and get credit, which, could save you. Maybe you could, graduate in 3.5 semester early, or just give you a little bit more flexibility during the school year if you want to work. So definitely a number of levers that students can pull.
Yeah, I think those are, great examples of other ways that students can try to make the costs manageable. And again, it's just about knowing what those are up front and then being able to develop a plan. But there are so many different ways to skin the cat for students. And so, I mean, I can speak a little bit to this as a parent. I mean, my oldest daughter is a freshman in college out in Boston. And so here I am in Illinois, in central Illinois. And you can imagine that the cost of some of these things that she might want to be doing just socially are pretty different if you're in Boston versus in central Illinois. And so we had a very candid conversation before she went off to school about the amount of money that she had saved from working over her summers and the piece of it that our family was going to manage, my wife and I were going to manage for her, and the piece that was on her, and started to create a little bit of a budget for her and just said weekly, here's about what you have in discretionary spending depending on what you want to be doing. And so yeah, all those things are very real. And like I said, I just have gone through it as a parent for the first time
Yeah.
too. So it's interesting from that side of things.
No, and that's a great example. Just a place, Boston is definitely a high cost of living area. So yeah, love that example. And I'm sure she's finding, that there's like, things are expensive, but there's probably a lot of like really like great, like free and low cost things and different museums and different things sponsored by her institution,
Yep.
that, you can access. And yeah, definitely the student discount is a great thing. Even I remember when my wife went to graduate school, even a few years ago. We definitely took advantage of the student
As you should have.
discounts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
you should
yeah.
have.
When
So
we could.
yeah,
So
yeah,
um, yeah, I guess to bring things back to Illinois,
sure.
one of the really great financial aid opportunities for in-state students is the MAP grants. And I was wondering, we have Illinois is one of the like larger states where Scholarships 360 parents and students are. So I was wondering if you could give listeners an overview of what the MAP grant program is and what it might mean for students.
Sure. Just briefly, state of Illinois is good to offer grants and scholarships to students from kind of lower income bands. And so the largest grant program in the state is called the MAP grant, and that stands for Monetary Award Program. And the maximum MAP grant's about $8,000 a year now. And certainly students might qualify for a full MAP grant or a partial MAP. But that also depends a little bit on the institution that the student selects. And so what I would say is, students just need to file the FAFSA each year as soon as possible after it opens on October 1st. And it's nice that it's opening on October 1st now.
Mhm.
And the MAP grant can cover tuition and fee charges and really at any college or university in Illinois. So it's really flexible. It can be a real benefit to students when you're talking about up to $8,000. And we're grateful to have it as an institution in Illinois that's trying to find ways to make all of the numbers work for qualified students. And so that is a real benefit to Illinois residents, and I'm grateful to the state for funding the MAP grant each year, because sometimes that's in question, and they've been pretty unwavering about supporting MAP, and even in recent years increasing that maximum MAP award amount. So MAP's great, and it is a tool that is a good one for us to keep students in state here.
Yeah, no, that I appreciate that, and a great reminder for students. That's another, another wonderful reason to complete the FAFSA as soon as you can. And as Jeff mentioned, I guess right now we're talking in mid-November. FAFSA has been open for a number of weeks. Was not delayed this year, which is great. And that is one of the always one of our top, if not the top recommendation for financial aid before you get to the outside scholarships, before you get to anything else. Just submitting that FAFSA and getting that done. Even if you're not even if you're not 100% sure if you're going to qualify for financial aid, it's still a smart move to submit that.
Absolutely. Yep. And of course, we're mentioning the FAFSA, but also the alternative application for financial aid in Illinois for those students. So either of those gets that process started, and the sooner the better to just make yourself eligible for all of the sources of funding that might be available to you. So MAP grant included.
Jeff, one to change gears a little bit.
Yeah.
I know that transferring from a 2-year community college can be a really affordable pathway for students. And I'm curious, do you have any advice for students who might be thinking about that? And I guess specifically thinking about transferring to Illinois State.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think transferring into a 4-year institution from a 2-year institution can be the best option, can be a great option or the best option for lots of students. And it just depends on, again, that individual student's situation and their family situation and what it is they're trying to achieve and what they want out of their college experience. There are pros and cons, I would say, to either starting as a first time in college freshman right out of high school and starting maybe 2 years in after having earned an associate's degree, or even after a year of community college and transferring in. So one benefit, of course, of starting at the transfer level is the financial component to it, the financial element, and that is, typically you are paying a much lesser cost in terms of credit hour per credit hour as a tuition rate at the community college level or the 2-year school. And so as you're starting to develop an interest in a particular career field or an academic pathway, and maybe you don't know exactly what that is, you can start on your general education requirements. You can get going with some kind of more general academic requirements that you'll need to complete as prerequisites for your major requirements. And you can do that at lower cost. And potentially, if you're at your local community college, you're also living at home, saving that money. You're still working a part-time job potentially. So there could be some real financial benefits. The one thing, Will, that I always caution students about
Mhm.
is if the driver really is financial. They also need to consider the fact that at most institutions in Illinois, at least, there are more scholarships in terms of the number available to freshmen than there are transfers. And the average dollar amount for those scholarships, merit scholarships, is typically much higher for freshmen than it is transfers. So sometimes we see students who apply to us as first time in college freshmen, and they receive, let's say, our most prestigious academic award that we offer. And it's
Mhm.
maybe ten or $12,000 a year. And they bypass that to go to the community college and then come in after the fact as a transfer. Well, they'll lose thousands and thousands of dollars in scholarship money by coming in as a transfer, because we just don't have as generous a scholarship menu for transfers as we do freshmen. So it's, in some cases, those two things offset and it's not an issue. In other cases, students are better off even financially coming in as first time in college freshmen. The other piece, of course, is coming in as a transfer. It's a slightly different experience socially in terms
Mhm.
of acclimating and that sort of thing. So some students do it exceptionally well. And of course, we're always on the lookout for our transfers to try to immediately make them feel a part of our community and have a sense of belonging and be a part of our organizations and immediately kind of wrap our arms around them. But it is a different thing than coming in with a cohort as freshmen and spending a full 4 years with them. So I guess it's a long answer because there are pros and cons to both, and it really just depends on what students are trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, I think that's really appreciate you calling the fact out that they're just at many schools there just are going to be more resources dedicated to first year freshman students. And if they choose to go another route, that's not like that scholarships necessarily if they're accepted to a school and then decided to go elsewhere and transfer in, that scholarship that they earned as a freshman is not necessarily going to be honored going the transfer route. And I think timeline wise, just a good reminder for students that, typically for a 2 year college, the timeline is going to be much, much later. So, if you're, thinking about that, you can definitely still apply to 4 year institutions, see what your financial aid packages look like and see what your options, see what those look like. Um, and then, yeah, I think it's a good reminder, just the sort of social experience and that is just going to be a little bit different and will probably vary from institution to institution. I know at the college I worked at, I was the transfer coordinator for a few years, and it was a pretty small cohort of transfer students who came in, and I think for that it was not necessarily like the best fit for everyone, just because you really um, you it wasn't like you were part of a really really large community. It was a pretty a few dozen transfer students perhaps at most. So that was not necessarily for everyone. um so yeah, I think it's appreciate all the nuances. I think it is a pretty nuanced question and recommendation for students.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, and I love your comment about the timelines, the varying timelines, and so you can even kind of test the waters a little bit and still potentially have that time to jump in as a transfer if that's the better fit for you. So, and then the other thing that I would tell you is there's as more and more students are doing dual credit and AP, and you referenced this earlier about graduating a semester early or a year early from college and saving money that way. That is absolutely an attractive option for many students. At the same time, I want students to think about the fact that you're only a college student once. And in many cases, it's a pretty great 4 years of your life. And so the rest of your life is work, and hopefully it's meaningful and you're going to be fulfilled. But some students aren't really ready to jump right into that at the age of 20. And so that's another thought to, just to consider is, do you want to squeeze everything out of that college experience before you go on into your professional pursuits too? So
yeah, no, that's I think a great a great point for students. And related, I guess this segues well to something else I was curious to get your take on, and that's ROI, and just thinking about return on an investment for a college education. And I think that's something we talk a lot about. But I'm kind of curious if you're a student or a parent out there, kind of practically how you might break that down as a concept for you personally.
yeah, and I think that is a great segue from what we were just talking about, because to me, the question of ROI is again a question of what are you trying to achieve? What is it out of the college experience that you really want? And what does a successful 2 or 3 or 4 year college experience look like? Because that's going to be different for everybody. And if students can't answer the question, why are you going to college? They probably should stop and really take stock, because I think some students just kind of think it's the next logical step. And for some students, especially those who are fortunate enough, it might just be kind of assumed that they're going to go on and continue their education and receive a higher ed degree. But there are different priorities. I mean, is the priority of the family to limit out of pocket costs? Is it to maximize career readiness and employability? Is it personal growth and enlightenment? Is it the quality, like we were just talking about, of the 4 year experience to say, look, this is a really unique time in your life and you want to find an institution that's going to give you every opportunity over a 4 year period to try new things and to find out who you are and to take some big swings. To me, it's about families doing enough research to feel like they know what schools on their list are going to provide the kinds of opportunities that matter most to them, and then deciding what those things are actually worth to them. And so it's a hard thing. I mean, all of us on this side of the desk are trying to establish and convey a value proposition for our institution. But we're all good at slightly different things and we're all unique. And so I think it's about, what does your wish list look like as a student and family? And then how does each of those schools that are ultimately on your list check those boxes? So, if I think the more conventional answer is, it's going to cost you X and you're going to earn Y as a graduate. But not everybody does or should look at the experience that way.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Jeff. Just not, that it is like it's important, of course, just to be making, a sound financial decision and just to be aware of what that like looks like afterwards as you're taking out, if you are taking out student loans in particular, are you going to be on track to, pay those back, or just being really honest with yourself. Like if you're, interested in going, if you're going to take out a lot of debt and you think maybe you need to go into a particularly like lucrative degree that that or a real lucrative career afterwards, that probably makes sense just to make that math work, and that you probably are taking some optionality off the table if you realize like, oh gosh, like I'm actually interested in something else. Now I'm in a position where I have this student loan debt and it's just going to be really difficult to pay this off because I realize I don't want to be doing the most the highest paying thing that I thought maybe I wanted to do. So it's not that that's not important to consider, but I appreciate you bringing in the experience, the just kind of the personal growth, the learning. And I think I think it is a little sad sometimes. I think that gets lost in the shuffle in these conversations, where the opportunity to go to college is to learn and to grow intellectually, to have new experiences, and that can be kind of hard to quantify, but it is a very important part of the process. And just also just being in a place where you're going to be happy, because you're just going to be more successful if you're happy. You look at the average rate of the kind of 4 year graduation, or the graduation rate to get a bachelor's degree in like 6 years, and that's not so high on average. Which can also just mean debt without a degree. That can mean multiple more years to go to school, which can be a big cost for families.
Yep. Yep, you're 100% right on all of that. I think the happiness, equating to success in academics and career preparedness and all those things. I mean, that is something that we preach all the time. You got to be happy. It's a precursor to all those other things.
Yeah. And I think sometimes students, your mind can change. I remember going to college, I went in, and I went to a school where we didn't declare it a major for a couple of years, but I thought I wanted to be an accounting major, which, is probably like towards the top of the charts for postgraduate earnings. And I wound up majoring in history just because I really liked it. I thought it was interesting. And, probably like not like at the top of the charts for earnings, but that was okay. And you can change your mind. And I think for most students, just like going in with an openness, just because I think you don't necessarily want to realize after you get your diploma that, gosh, you just spent like 4 years doing the thing that you just thought you were supposed to do, and you missed out on the opportunity just to have maybe a more interesting, richer experience for yourself.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Absolutely right.
so as we get to the last question, I like to kind of bring this back to practical admissions advice for students and families, and try and also keep that kind of relevant for the time of the year. So we're in like mid-November. If you're a senior out there, and this is specifically for seniors, so if you're a senior out there, maybe you've completed your FAFSA, maybe you're working on it, maybe you have applied to a school or two earlier rolling. Maybe you're planning, you're working on your applications right now. Maybe you haven't really done a lot, and you're planning on cramming in a lot of this work over your Thanksgiving and end of your holiday Christmas breaks. But from your perspective, Jeff, like what's one piece of advice that students and might be able to act on like in the very next week that can get them ahead?
Yeah, boiling it down to one piece of advice is difficult. Because as you just kind of alluded to, there everybody's in a slightly different place. I would say quickly, if you haven't submitted your application for admission, do so. It's what starts the process, and it's not too late. But the longer you wait, the more likely your program of choice is going to be at capacity, or you've missed a scholarship deadline that might really help you and your family. If you haven't filed your FAFSA, that is another thing that I would do, as soon as humanly possible, because it just puts you as a student in a better position to have choice and to know what all of your options are. And if you've done those things, hey, go check out Scholarships and Scholarships 360. Why wouldn't you? And see what's out there for you in that way. But the thing, I guess, if I were to give one piece of advice that's supposed to be universal in nature, I would say remember that this process is your own, and don't get caught up with what your friends are doing, what a family friend has told you to do, what those around you are talking about. Your timeline is your timeline. And if you work backwards as a freshman from May 1st is kind of that national decision deadline, and maybe a more artificial timeline than previously. But if you work backwards from May 1, just go, what are all the things that I'm going to want to know so that I know I'm making the best decision in, 6 months, in 5 months from now. And I would say get on the stick on those things. So if you haven't applied, do that. If you've taken a couple of those first steps, go visit schools if you haven't yet. That is so eye-opening for people, and never be afraid to ask questions, because no one knows everything about this process, and we all feel dumb, and we think we're asking questions that we should know the answers to. But that's what our job is offices of admission are out there to help students through this somewhat confusing process. And so I don't know that I have any one piece of advice other than this process is yours and yours alone. There's no one right way to do it. Just make sure that you're getting everything done in a way that's going to allow you to know what is that one school that's the right fit for you in all the ways that you need it to be by the early part of May. That's my advice.
Yeah, no, I love all of that and appreciate, humoring me, because it's hard when everyone's in a different spot. But yeah, I guess to reiterate, just if you're sitting there with your application is done, just submit it. I think I remember being on the school counseling side and just seeing, I think for so many students, it's kind of the like last bit of paralysis before just like hitting submit. If you feel you've done your put your all on your application, you've gotten a counselor, a parent, someone else trusted to review it, probably like good. And Jeff, as you mentioned, scholarship deadlines are like actively happening right now, depending on the school, and that like can be the matter of like thousands and thousands of dollars potentially. So you don't want to wait around, but then also kind of focusing on your own process. I think there is a lot of it can be kind of a very comparative process, and I think also reiterating that advice for parents out there, who I know could also be very involved, which is great, but also very aware of what their friends or the kids of their friends are doing or not doing, and just kind of running, as you put it, running your own race and just focusing on your own goals. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. This was so much fun. I'm glad that we got to dig into all of this. And I think there'll be just a ton of really great actionable advice for students out there. So really, really appreciate the time.
Likewise, yeah. Thanks for inviting me, and this was a lot of fun. I always love talking shop, and if there's anything in here that's helpful to students, all the better. So I certainly wish all the students out there the best of luck with their individual processes. And we're always here at Illinois State, happy to help. But obviously, you've got resources everywhere, and what I hope for all those students is they just find the right fit for them, and they go on to be really happy with their decisions. So best of luck to everybody out there.
Yeah, no, that's I think a great note to end on. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Will.